When Missouri occasionally gets a five-star recruit, he's almost always from within the state. Well, how about a couple five-star players from outside of Missouri? Don't laugh. It could absolutely happen. Let's talk about it. And a big recruiting period coming up right now on Locked On Mizzou.
You are Locked On Mizzou, your daily podcast on the Missouri Tigers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, all you true sons and daughters. I'm John Miller, your Mizzou mafioso and the central scrutinizer of Missouri Tigers football and basketball. On today's program, there was some massive news breaking last week that I didn't get to. Once again, some really huge changes coming to college football. I'm going to get into revenue sharing with the players coming up here at some point in the program, but I do want to start off talking about recruiting because that was a big topic on yesterday's program, was talking about how the 2020 Mizzou class may be one of the most important of all time, just based on, well, last season being such a crucial year, that 2020 season, that 2020 class, I should say, such a huge part of last season's success. But you know what? Let's talk about the future a little bit. So many five stars popping up on Missouri's radar right now. It would make Dave Meltzer jealous. But seriously, though, now a five-star quarterback is a part of the fold for Missouri. Matt Zollers, now officially a composite five-star recruit over at On3. That's their industry average ranking, a weighted average that includes all four of the major recruiting outlets. A big part of that, well, Zollers went from unranked recently at Rivals, where Gabe DeArmond at Power Mizzou keeps his shop, at least for now. Well, he's gone from unranked to 70th over at Rivals. That's a huge jump all the way to a top 100 player there. So as a result, Zollers' ranking over there much more in line with his ranking at On3, where On3 has him as one of the highest ranked quarterbacks in the country. In fact, number 2 nationally at last check. Now, this is just yet another sign that Missouri is swimming in different waters here. As I've pointed out, even the recently added five-star player, Williams Winery from Lee Summit, Missouri, well, just like Dorial Green Beckham before him, and Sheldon Richardson, and Blaine Gabbert, and of course, Luther Burden III as well, all of those guys were indeed from Missouri, or at the very least, in Luther Burden's case, he was originally, grew up in Missouri, ended up going to East St. Louis High School just across the Mississippi River. We're just going to go ahead and say that's good enough for government work there with Luther Burden. We'll call him a Missouri guy. But the point here is that not only does Missouri have the best position possible, obviously here, if you're going to have one position, have a five-star, make it quarterback, ladies and gentlemen. But not only that, Missouri in on another five-star visitor this weekend. Five-star offensive tackle from the Dallas area, Michael Fasusi, is visiting Missouri this weekend. So this is really kind of the unofficial kickoff of another big-time period here for Missouri recruiting. Fasusi, really the biggest name, the highest-ranked name out there on the market that is really heavily tied to the Tigers. Fasusi also being heavily recruited by his home state, Texas, Texas A&M, and also Oklahoma, who recruits the Texas area, of course, heavily as well. So again, putting Missouri with a five-star player from Dallas, or just Texas in general, quite honestly, up there with Texas, Texas A&M, and Oklahoma. Just looking at the history of Missouri recruiting and Missouri football in general, it's just frankly stunning that the Tigers even have a chance here. And the Tigers appear to have a real chance. Fasusi, from what I can tell, is playing his cards pretty close to the vest and basically says those four leaders there, they all have a shot, and he's just going to kind of let it play out and see who ends up winning the day. So it doesn't seem like a real big lean there for Fasusi. Again, what a coup that would be if Missouri could possibly pull that off. But regardless, even if Missouri doesn't get Fasusi, you look at the 2025 class right now. As Gabe DeArmond said, he says, quote, yesterday on Twitter, there's a legitimate chance Mizzou could end up with 5 or more top 100 players in this class. And if I just had to guess there what the 5 likely ones would be, of course, Matt Zollers, another offensive lineman, Lamont Rogers, a 4-star guy a lot of people have as a Missouri lean, Javen Boggs from Florida, a receiver, also Corey Sims, St. Louis area safety, and of course others like Michael Fasusi are a legitimate possibility as well. So quite honestly, while the Missouri 2020 class, as I pointed out, that transition class in retrospect was excellent. Not the highest ranked class in the world, about 50th or so, if memory serves. Well, Drinkwitz's real first class, 2021, ranked anywhere from 15th to 20th or so. You know what? In retrospect, that class ended up being not as fruitful as you would have hoped. Of course, Dalen Carnell, a huge part of the Missouri defense. Realist George, certainly a contributor last season. Also Connor Tollison, Missouri's starting center. But a couple of big contributors, Mekhi Wingo and Dominic Lovett. Hey, you get points for good recruiting there, but unfortunately they finished their careers out at LSU and Georgia respectively. So what I'm saying here is that even though the 2021 class, you look back at that, for example, really the transfer portal has probably been a net positive for Missouri, despite a rough start there. When Mekhi Wingo and Dominic Lovett both left, I think a lot of Missouri fans, like myself included, were really concerned that Missouri might be a program that is sort of getting picked off by maybe some of the bigger blue blood teams in the SEC and throughout the country. But it just goes to show you, my goodness, in 3 or 4 years or so, things have really changed here, because I think quite clearly the transfer portal has been a net positive for Missouri the last few seasons, despite those 2 significant losses early. Because if you look at how it's going right now, well, Missouri isn't losing a lot of significant starters. In fact, in this past cycle, I can't think of one. Now, as far as the 2022 class goes, it's still maybe a little early to judge it completely, but Luther Burden is certainly buoying that class's production right now. And really, other than Burden, only Armand Mimbu has been a major contributor so far in that class. Again, a highly ranked top 15 type class. We'll just have to see how it plays out in the long run. But just to give you a little context there, the next season's class, the 2023 high school recruiting class, well, already some good dividends being paid there for Missouri. Brett Norfleet going to be your starting tight end this season. Marquis Speedy Johnson, to me, obviously he was a tremendous part of the Missouri offense last season, a real key contributor in at least 2 or 3 ball games that I can think of off the top of my head, but also a guy I think is going to really take a step forward this season. Also, Logan Reichert, a guy who's competing for time on the offensive line for this upcoming season. And Marvin Burks at safety has already played some significant snaps for Missouri last season. Again, this is all a really good sign for the future. And there's just been a tremendous amount of off-the-field news happening in the world of college football in the last week or so, including something that could affect the Missouri schedule for football this upcoming season. So I want to talk about exactly what that is coming up here in just a little bit. But first, of course, I'm excited that summer is here. Baseball is in full swing. Just last week, had a last-minute hair to go to a Royals game. And, of course, I had to use Gametime, the absolute best place to get last-minute tickets. And my all-in price of $73, including fees and everything else, got me just about 10 rows behind the Royals dugout. In fact, between the entrance to the dugout and the on-deck circle, You want to talk about absolutely perfect seats on a perfect night for baseball. Thank you to Gametime for that. And Gametime can help you for whatever your last-minute tickets are, your ticket needs are, whether it's baseball. Heck, maybe you want to get down to the NBA Finals. Just check out high-profile events through the Gametime app, and they'll get you there. But again, NHL, MLB, concerts, soccer, MLS, whatever you can think of, I promise you that Gametime is going to get you the lowest price, and they promise you with their lowest price guarantee, or Gametime will credit you 110% of the difference. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off your first purchase. Download Gametime today. Last-minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Well, with the Kansas City Chiefs playing a regular season game on Black Friday this year, I previously and recently brought up the possibility that the Chiefs and the Missouri Tigers could be playing on the same day and ostensibly competing for the first time possibly ever that I can think of. Maybe there was a one-off situation when Missouri played a bowl game the same day as the Chiefs, perhaps. That could have happened, but if there's an example of that, I couldn't think of it off the top of my head. Would be interested to hear from all of you true sons or daughters if you could come up with a little bit of piece of trivia there. But regardless, the NFL going up against college football, just not something that happens very frequently, but it's certainly going to happen this year, whether the Tigers are involved or not. The 2024 Egg Bowl, according to Ross Dellinger, of course, between Ole Miss and Mississippi State, has been played on Thanksgiving for quite a few years, I believe. Well, it's now shifting to Black Friday for a 2:30 kickoff on ABC. So not only the Chiefs that day, the Egg Bowl as well. I've got to think Missouri and Arkansas not going to be shifted to Black Friday for the first time. Well, in many years, certainly. Is it the first time ever in SEC history? I didn't think about that one as I did my research. Just came up in the old noggin just now. But regardless, I think Missouri and Arkansas no longer going to be that featured game. You know, quite frankly, whether you're into that or not, I think just big picture, I'm still against the NFL competing with college football. Just as a fan of football in general, as a fan of both college football and NFL football, I just don't see this as necessary. I understand that short term, the NFL can secure another $100 million or $50. I don't know exactly what the number is. It's a significant amount of money short term to secure just one game, sell off those rights to Amazon Prime or Peacock or whomever it might be. But the point is, I think long-term, there is something lost there. I think when you continue to diminish college football, well, you might hurt your own product in the long run. I think what's good for football is good for football. If you want to crush the NBA and basketball and compete against them head-to-head on Christmas Day, for instance, well, you know what? Go right ahead. I can't think of a great argument against that. But against college football, though, to me, that's a little penny-wise, pound-foolish. And speaking of pennies, well, apparently the NCAA and some of these athletic departments are going to owe about 200 billion pennies in back pay damages to former Division I athletes. Now, of course, most people say dollars, so let's say that. $2.7 billion. Yes, billion with a B, Dr. Evil. But, you know, a lot of questions still very much remain here. Now, certainly future revenue sharing, there's going to be future revenue sharing coming here is the big takeaway. So in other words, all the complaints that many people like myself have had for years now is that, well, wait a second, NIL is now legal, but why can't, for example, Missouri players get some of that sweet, sweet Disney and ESPN money that is coming through the coffers of these athletic departments. Well, that appears to be happening now. In fact, this is a settlement, by the way. The NCAA did not lose this case, although it may well have. And if it did, that apparently was something that could be an existential threat to the NCAA. In other words, had they lost that case, they might not have had enough money to continue to exist. So what's happening here is almost certainly a revenue sharing model between the power conference schools and athletes, though I would point out that no school is actually required to share any revenue at all. And also, if it does, it cannot go above an agreed upon $20 million plus threshold. So basically, all this money, by the way, it's going to come from the following bucket: media, TV rights, also ticket sales, live events, and sponsorships. Donations, for instance, from private donations to the athletic department, that type of stuff not going to be a part of this calculation. So once again, the athletic departments have figured out, hey, we still get this one little corner of money that's just ours, right? Sweet. Okay, so I don't know. Interestingly, also roster limits now quite possibly will be the new normal instead of scholarship limits. Walk-ons could be a thing of the past. Well, Dennis Gates, quite frankly, is already in that mode of going beyond the scholarship limits and having scholarship caliber players on the roster. What could ultimately happen here if there are no walk-ons for all intents and purposes? And in the women's game, what you've seen is you'll see managers, for instance, student managers who may have been decent high school players, males more often than not, by the way, will scrimmage against the Missouri women's basketball team, for example. So still tons of questions to answer here. I brought up women's basketball. Well, how does Title IX factor into all of this, for example? Are there going to be proportional payments, again, to women's basketball, which has its own deal with ESPN, but obviously quite a bit less lucrative than the one that March Madness has with Turner right now? Or is all of that just thrown into one pie and divided up equally? Again, however you think that should happen, to me, all of this is still very much up for debate and in question. Also, how much of a strain is this going to put on athletic departments and their budgets? Is this ultimately going to result in lower level sports like golf, for instance, and tennis? Are those kind of sports going to be cut? Is wrestling in trouble here? Still seems like, ultimately football especially, but also probably men's basketball needs to break away from everything else, because as the example I always use is, why should UCLA softball have to fly across the country to play Rutgers or Maryland in this newfangled Big Ten? That just doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. Again, nothing against softball. In fact, I'm pro softball. I'm just saying, why can't UCLA play Cal and Stanford and maybe Pepperdine and UC Davis and Fresno State? I mean, I've just named off about a half dozen colleges in California alone. Why do these people need to fly all the way across the country? And finally, since I've laid all this out here with all these questions, to me, listen, I'm not a lawyer by any stretch of the imagination, but, just putting in a salary cap, for instance, which de facto there's going to be a salary cap here one way or the other if the amount of, if there's a $20 million threshold, for instance, on revenue sharing, well, then this whole thing started. A lot of the crux of this debate was, well, hey, the NCAA is limiting compensation here. And if this was being argued on an antitrust basis, for instance, boy, that seems pretty dubious to me that, oh, well, a salary cap, that doesn't limit compensation. Really? It sure as heck logically does. Legally, how that all works out, we'll just have to see. I'm just saying none of this is nearly as simple as the plaintiffs' lawyers who are taking a victory lap right now. It's just not as simple as they're making it out to be. Still a lot of questions to be answered. And you know what? Since I brought up ESPN and Disney earlier, I want to talk about how Greg Sankey, the SEC commissioner, not the ESPN commissioner, but no, the SEC commissioner, Greg Sankey, is basically holding Disney and ESPN hostage. Let's talk about that after these quick words. So this previous offseason, the offseason of 2023, I made a couple predictions about media rights, and, well, I was right and wrong. The part I got right is that, well, sports media rights was going to start hitting a bit of a wall, and certainly the SEC has found that to be the case. Though the part I was wrong about, I truly thought that the SEC going from 8 games to 9 games would have happened by now. Not necessarily for the 2024 season. I just certainly thought that by now an agreement would have been put into place. I just felt like that was a strong enough brand that ESPN, Disney would frankly be desperate enough to want to keep that sort of thing around, to get another property. Just like the NFL is able to sell off another Black Friday game, especially involving a marquee team like the Kansas City Chiefs. Well, that was an easy sell for them. But surprisingly, to me at least, it's been a little bit of a harder sell for Greg Sankey and his conference to sell another game to ESPN, or frankly, it could be anybody else. It could be certainly Amazon Prime out there. There's plenty of streamers who need content as well. But at this point, Sankey's really starting to play hardball and saying, hey, these rivalry games, some of these big-time rivalry games that happen every single year, we're not talking Iron Bowl. Clearly, Auburn and Alabama is still going to happen. But what about Alabama and Tennessee? Is that going to happen? Well, according to Greg Sankey, it's not going to be happening on an annual basis unless we get to 9 games. So that is a pretty good negotiating tactic here. Similarly, yes, the Red River Shootout is going to be happening every year between Oklahoma and Texas. But what about Texas and Texas A&M? That's certainly an interesting rivalry game I'd like to see on an annual basis, especially with all the hurt feelings stemming back to the first round of conference realignment when Texas A&M left for the SEC originally. If you're an Aggies fan, by the way, you've got to be feeling even better of an instinct to tell Texas fans, I told you so, than Missouri fans. That's one thing I think we in Aggie Nation can be directly aligned with there. But regardless, I think ultimately the take here is that 9 games is absolutely going to happen. I think it's clearly Greg Sankey wants it to happen. He wants the extra money. I think ESPN, Disney, or it could be Amazon Prime, could be, again, whoever ends up actually buying the rights to that 9th game, it's going to happen eventually, and it'll be a good property for them. It's just a matter of negotiating here and finding the right price, because ultimately the reason I thought all these media deals, all the spending in the streaming space was going to come crashing down, well, there's been a change in the macroeconomic environment. Rising interest rates, frankly, just the cost of borrowing money, and with inflation rising as well. Just a lot of different factors here that caused, a bit of a bubble to burst there, I think, with media rights. And there's no doubt that that's happening when the SEC is having to really play hardball to get what it wants as well. Again, it's going to happen. 9-game SEC schedule. What that looks like for Missouri, we'll just have to see in the long run, but I think the 9 games is still just a matter of when, not if. And thanks, as always, for joining me here on Locked On Mizzou. Hopefully it's not a question of if you enjoyed the program today, but just how much. Hopefully this has been a 5-star quality program for you. Thanks for telling other true sons and daughters that we are free and available on YouTube, Spotify, SiriusXM app, and ad-free on Amazon Music as well. So until next time, I am John Miller, and this has been Locked on Mizzou.